This is something we haven't done on our show. It's something that a lot of shows do, a lot of basketball analysts do. And hey, I mean, over 4 years into this iteration of the show, it felt like a good time for us to do this. So here we are. We're going to be talking about the great GOAT debate as it stands in 2023, looking through all of basketball history. Who is the greatest of all time? Talking about, of course, individual players, although team accomplishments will factor in. So here's how we're doing this. Let me sort of outline. We posted on Twitter, X, whatever you're calling it. It seems to us that there are three things that factor in when you're considering the GOAT of the sport. And those three things are: have you won 3 or more NBA titles? So there's kind of a floor there of team success. Have you acquired individual accolades? Have you won MVP? Have you won multiple MVPs? Have you won other individual accolades? And then lastly, have you had a cultural, maybe pop culture, maybe more broad than that, maybe more narrow than that, but what is your cultural and league-wide impact? So those are the three things that we're looking at in our tier list here. Speaking of which, we have a tier maker set to go. But yeah, we've got our work cut out for us, Justin. Anything you want to say overall before we get into the list?
The only thing I want to say, and I know I'm in a minority about this, but when coming up with these tier lists, and especially when we get to later, just our top 10 players of all time, I'm just speaking for myself. um, I would take like my list with kind of a grain of salt, just because I kind of have a rule. I broke this rule just because I think to have this list in terms of encompassing the entire history of the league, I think it's important to include everybody. But I feel the most qualified experts to speak about this subject, I mean, you're looking at somebody that has to be like 70, 80, 90 years old, someone that has really watched all these players play in their prime, that they can compare eras. And so I
Right.
just don't think reading stats or watching YouTube videos, or even honestly, even conducting interviews is good enough. I think just living in that era is really the only way to assess each player's performance. So this I just preface that. I think just especially with my opinions and then just with my list, it's mostly going off players that I've seen in person and nothing against kind of the older players that have built this league from like the 50s and 60s and 70s. So that's what I wanted to kind of put out there before we get started.
No, I hear you, and I think my top 10 when we get to that later on is going to tick some people off. I think no matter what you do in a GOAT conversation, you're always going to make someone angry. So I think we we kind of take that as an inherent risk, but we're trying to, as we always do on our show, have a nuanced conversation about it. And we would love your feedback. Where are we right? Where are we wrong? All those things, of course. So if you want to post your top 10 on our YouTube or on social media with the show, happy to look that over. Happy to hear the opinions that are widely going to differ from ours. So without further ado, we're going to start by just going through some players, and I think you'll get a feel for how we've categorized the tiers as we go along. I would say at the very top of the list are the people that you could bring up in a GOAT argument, and there's going to be a legitimate debate. Is how I would categorize it. So, like in tier 4 on our list here, if you bring this up, you're probably going to get laughed out of the room if you try to argue for that person being the GOAT. Tier 3, maybe you have an outside shot, probably not. Tier 2 is going to be guys that, maybe just missed the mark in terms of like titles, not enough titles, things like that, not enough team success to really make it. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. We're going to go first with Dwayne Wade is on our list here. And I'm going to put him in our tier 4, subject to change. He had finals MVP. He had 3 NBA titles, was the bus driver, to use that TNT terminology, was the bus driver for the Miami Heat in 2006. Shaquille O'Neal, he's in the argument as one of the most physically dominant basketball players we have ever seen. Um, and he won 4 titles, had only one MVP award, which was kind of shocking to me, Justin, as I looked at that list. Notable misses: Wilt, Wilt Chamberlain here, Mr. 100 points. He goes into tier 3, which is he's a notable miss from our qualifiers. Now, he has mythological statistics. I mean, averaging 50 plus points for a season, that 100-point game that I mentioned, only 2 titles. So could argue, and many have, that like his ego and sort of the black hole nature of his game maybe took away from more individual greatness. Many will argue, many will put him up in a higher tier, and he might make an appearance in our top 10 lists. We'll see. Hakeem Olajuwon, arguably the greatest defender in NBA history, is next on the list. He also is a notable miss. 2 titles, didn't clear our 3-title floor here.
I will say with Will Chamberlain, it's kind of like, again, we did not see him play as he's like you're saying, man,
Right,
he's kind of a myth. So it's one of those things that we don't have that impact. So when we see him hold up that scoring record, it's kind of like it's great, but we just can't feel the significance of it compared to even Devin Booker, most recently.
right. 2 titles for Wilt,
Yeah,
4 MVPs. So nobody would doubt, I think, his individual greatness. And I definitely don't mean it as like a diss for Wilt, just going with the criteria that that we came up with on Twitter. And Allen Iverson, man, a lot of individual success, not a whole lot of team success. Took the 76ers to the NBA Finals, where they lost in 5 to the Lakers, the Shaq Lakers, by the way. His impact on the culture of the game
yeah,
was huge, significant, maybe from a cultural standpoint, more so than Dwayne Wade. Um, so,
agreed.
Bill Russell, he's going right to the top. The man had 11 titles. He's Mr. Championship. Some of those as a player slash coach. He also had 5 MVPs. He was the ultimate teammate, and I think he's still to this day, even in spite of the era that he played in, and yes, less teams, maybe less depth in the league during some of those initial titles. I still think he belongs in the GOAT conversation, one of the greatest defenders of all time, and a guy who famously was willing to sacrifice for the good of the team. But Russell's going to the top for me. Legend of the sport, one of the initial legends. Speaking of legends, well, a legend that maybe history has forgotten a little bit. He's going to go on our notable miss list, as he had only 1 title. He had 2 MVPs, was actually the first MVP in NBA history, won that award twice. 1956, by the way, was when the NBA MVP award started. That's Bob Pettit. Moving right along, John Havlicek, my favorite number 17. He revolutionized the 6-man of the league award. He won titles in 74 and 76 after Russell had retired from basketball, so kind of kept the Celtics relevant. Charles Barkley, man, I love Charles Barkley, so I would love to put him even higher. He did win an MVP award. I'm going to put him on our tier 3 here. One of the all-time great rebounders in the league as well. The thing he always gets ribbed for, and that's true, is that he never won the NBA title. But man, he was right there on several occasions. Clyde the Glide Drexler, he goes in tier 4 in my book. I'm going to put him ahead of Iverson. Uh, well, culturally, maybe not, but he did win 2 titles in Houston. He was not the primary option at that point. We know Hakeem's dominance in the 90s there. He had his own good thing going in Portland for a while there, did make the finals where he lost to the Jordan Bulls. Dr. J, a guy who I think is not talked about enough, a guy who I think you and I just missed, Justin. But if you count the ABA into the mix, he won 3 titles and he won 4 MVPs overall. I believe 1 MVP in the NBA once he came over, and he did win on the 76ers that 83 title with Moses Malone. So he gets to move up pretty high because he does clear that 3 title floor. And I want to pause here, Justin, because I've been rambling and get some of your thoughts.
No, not too much thoughts. I think what's interesting is cultural impact.
Yeah,
That's where it's tough because you're right with Clyde Drexler as a player. I think higher than Iverson, but cultural impact. I mean, I would say he's leading the top tier, arguably. Just so many players have been influenced by him.
right.
I think his impact cannot be understated that way. But I mean, it's just again, it's so subjective. So it's just kind of like, what's your flavor? What you like?
Honestly, yeah, I could have them in either order there and,
Yeah.
and be pretty happy. So with you there for sure. um, Now, David Robinson, one of the great bigs to come into the league in the 80s, kind of like tail end of sort of that golden age in the NBA. He did win championship with the Spurs. He did get an MVP in the 90s. So he doesn't really pass the test in terms of um, getting 3+ titles, but he is a great individual player. I don't think quite as great as Charles Barkley from the eyeball test, though he is one of those great bigs. They both have one MVP, um, and he's kind of the very start when Duncan came in as a rookie. They won that title, the start of that iconic Spurs dynasty, that lasted through the mid 2010s. So I think he should get some credit for being part of the foundation there, even though he was just there for the start of that. Um, KG is next up. KG is awesome. He won that 2008 title when the Celtics beat the Lakers. He was part of that infamous Big Three: Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, KG. Great as an individual player, not as many individual accolades. Revered as a great defender of the league, and revitalized the Celtics. I think I would probably put him in that tier 3, maybe down here just below Iverson in this tier 4. We'll go here. I don't believe KG ever won an MVP. So I'm going to put him down here on this tier 4 for right now. George Gervin, the Iceman, great scorer, didn't win an MVP, didn't win any titles, great individual player of the 80s and 90s. So he goes down on that bottom tier level. Steph Curry, a guy that was huge for culture of this modern day Warriors dynasty, and so just recently picked up his 4th chip. He had 2 MVPs, including the only unanimous MVP vote in NBA history. He goes right up here. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This is not hard. I mean, he won 6 MVPs. He won 6 titles. He also was the foundation of the greatest college basketball dynasty. We had that interview with Larry Farmer, who was part of that dynasty and also a coach at UCLA. You should definitely check out that interview if you haven't seen it in our archives yet. Kareem goes at the top of the list to me, and I don't think it's controversial at all. Was the initial anchor of the Showtime Lakers. Dirk Nowitzki, arguably the best player ever to do it from Europe. Again, arguably, certainly, I think the best scorer from Europe in NBA history. Had a title, had an MVP. KD, 2 titles on those Warriors teams, arguably the greatest starting 5 that we've ever seen. He also has an MVP award. Doesn't clear our title floor, but might arguably be, some would say, the greatest small forward in NBA history. Justin, take a pause here and get your thoughts on these.
I think, especially with Julius Irving and Steph Curry, I think you'll see later, just the cultural impact cannot be understated because that you can argue lasts more than stats on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, if you take a look at like Will Chamberlain, let's be real, Will Chamberlain and Julius Irving's significance to the game of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can make an argument that Julius Irving has way more of an impact. Or I even hate to say it, but you take a look at somebody like Kareem, right? Like arguably a GOAT, correct? The
Mm-hmm.
sky hook.
Mm-hmm.
But you take a look, I mean, fundamentally with Julius Irving, I mean, the dunk was pretty much revolutionized with him as well, and not to mention through street ball and all the history within New York. So, but at the same time, with Kareem, you got to take a look at his college career as well. So that's another thing we have to be clear: are we factoring their college careers, and then are we factoring Olympics as well? Because then it gets a lot more complicated if we're talking about their other accolades.
Yeah, I think you can define it however you like. I For Kareem, I do factor in his college career. I mean, I
Yeah,
mentioned it earlier. I kind of do it in line with like the Basketball Hall of Fame, which factors in college career as well,
sure. Yeah.
just like playing career overall. Moving right forward, Karl Malone. Karl Malone, uh, great individual stats. Um, 2 MVPs that he won. Some people say controversially, maybe took an MVP that belonged to Jordan away from him. Made the NBA Finals twice with John Stockton, who is also on this tier list, but just unfortunately for him, couldn't get it done. Great individual accomplishments. Also, a top 10 scorer in league history. Um, Held, I believe, past Jordan pretty quickly after Jordan retired, um, which was a shock to me. But lots of consistency, lots of durability. Um, for right now, I'm going to put him up here behind Dirk. I think makes sense since he has more individual accolades, but no championship. Next on the list, Kobe Bryant. Um, we all know the tragic passing of Kobe Bryant, but I think when looking at Kobe's impact around the league, and Justin, you know as well as I do, how many of the players talk about, like Trae Young as an example, and he's just one of many, talking about Kobe Bryant being one of his main influences. The guy that this current generation, or maybe the generation before this current generation at this point, the guy who they all were looking up to, which I understand because you and I grew up with Jordan, watching him play and razzle dazzle. A lot of the guys in the league now, of course, I mean, LeBron's like around our age, Justin, but LeBron's also the oldest player in the league at this point. So Kobe was a lot of players' Jordan. He won 5 titles. I think criminally, in hindsight, only won 1 MVP. But Kobe Bryant's going to go up here in that conversation, moving
Okay,
right
one more
through.
note.
Oh, yeah,
One
yeah.
more note. Sorry,
Nope.
with Karl Malone. I don't know. Did I tell you I met Karl Malone when I was 8?
Was that at the
Did I
Toyota
tell-
dealership here
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Albuquerque?
yeah,
Nice. I think you did.
yeah. Okay, yeah, because he had Matt and I. If you listen to the podcast, born and raised in Albuquerque, and Karl Malone had a car dealership in Albuquerque. And I think we're driving home. I think my mom spotted him. He's just like, I don't know how she does the eagle eye, like way over there. And we went and got his autograph. We lost the autographs. I think my dad had a copy in his office, and then he went. My dad's former band director. I lost my autograph copy, but it's pretty cool. He spent some time to talk with us, so I'll never forget that. I mean, people will talk crap about Karl Malone, just whatever beliefs you have about him. But when I was 8, he was cool to us. Yeah, he didn't know us from anything, so it was a a memorable moment. Even though I was a hardcore Jordan fan, I felt like I was talking to the enemy, especially when I was 8. So
Yeah, I was gonna
there's a little
ask,
bit of a note there.
did you have your Bulls gear on?
I don't think so. Not that day.
Oh,
No.
whew, okay. That's
Right?
fortunate.
I know.
No, very
Hilarious.
cool. I mean, pretty rare that you see these guys or get to meet them.
I know.
They're pretty elusive, so that's
They are.
awesome. Next, another beast of the 80s and early 90s, Larry Bird. Um, Larry Legend, many call him. Won 3 titles with the 80s Celtics, won 3 MVPs in a row. 84, 85, and 86. He's one of only 3 players to do it. The other 2 are already on our list, Will Chamberlain and Bill Russell. So joined some elite company there. Again, one of those players that revitalized one of the winningest franchises in NBA history, the Celtics. So I think a spot way up high in maybe the just under the GOAT category. Some people might have him in the, hey, it's reasonable to debate him as the GOAT. I'm putting him at the very, very top of our tier 2 because I think the next person on our list may leapfrog him as the greatest small forward of all time. Just any quick thoughts on Larry Legend?
Yeah, it was debatable putting him in my top 10 list, and you'll see later it was borderline. He barely made it, but
Mm.
you'll see why with his career stats later on.
Young basketball fans who grew up with Kobe on the wall know LeBron James and are playing against him now. He ascends to the top of this list. For me personally, this is probably going to be maybe the biggest controversy of my list. I'm putting him behind Kobe at this point. Now,
Mm.
he's still playing. The stats are impressive, no doubt. Um, he has 4 titles, 4 MVPs. Justin, you know how much I loved LeBron coming into the league. So you know how much I respect his game and what he's done on the court. He's going there for me right now. We'll talk about that more on our top
Yeah,
10
we'll get
list.
into it later. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously last season he passed Kareem. He's the all-time scoring champ in the NBA, and he's not even really considered a scorer. Next on our list, we've got uh, Jerry West, who went 1-9, or I'm sorry, 1-8, I believe, in the NBA Finals. So he did win a title. Never won an MVP award. I feel comfortable putting him because he didn't clear the title floor. I mean, incredible player, but he's going to go on our tier 3 list here. Magic, 5 titles, 3 MVPs in the loaded 80s, lost some time to his career due to the HIV diagnosis in the early 90s. I think people don't really realize that Magic in the late 80s was so much better than people give him credit for. In 1990 is when he won his last MVP award. I think people think it happened early while he still had Kareem, but the 2
yeah,
MVPs that he won were later. And if you read about like the 87, 88 finals, Magic was really the driving force and without a doubt the leader of the team. I mean, Kareem, his longevity was incredible too, like LeBron. Um, in my opinion, Magic is the second best Laker behind Kareem. I know a lot of people are not going to agree with that, but that's where
yeah.
I've got him for the moment. Um, but I do think he belongs in the overall GOAT conversation based on what he did and when he did it. Um, Next guy, a guy you and I have never heard of, Justin, certainly, Michael
Correct.
Jordan. Let's just, he's got 6
Very good.
titles, 2 three-peats, 5 MVPs in the modern era. Got his first MVP in the late 80s, had to go through the bad boy Pistons, who won back-to-back titles. And he, I mean, he's up there for most people. That's not all that controversial. You might not have him as your number 1, but I think everyone would agree he's in the GOAT conversation. Moses Malone here. one title and 3 MVPs. I'm going to put him. Uh, Gosh, this is a tough place. Um, I'll just split the difference here. Put him right between KD and Dirk. We can argue over semantics later. Scottie Pippen, arguably the greatest perimeter defender on in NBA history, on a key member of your Chicago Bulls, Justin. He was a Robin to Jordan's Batman. Ultimately, the individual accolades are lacking, though, so I think he belongs here on this tier 4. Stockton, arguably, some people would say greatest point guard of all time, and I'm not even kidding. I don't know. This is really tough on the bottom. I'm going to say I don't have this in pen down here. You can convince me otherwise with certain things about the bottom of the list there. Tim Duncan, 5 titles, 2 MVP awards in a very crowded MVP era. So he did get one more MVP than Kobe. I love Tim Duncan. And I think depending on how much credit you give him for the Spurs, I think he belongs on tier 2 no matter what. I think he was a very quiet guy, no doubt. Didn't have like the endorsement deals that like Shaq had, or the charisma of Shaq and Julius Erving or Steph Curry. But man, if you look at the success of that team, he's definitely up there. We can certainly argue about where he belongs, but I think tier 2 is inarguable for Duncan. And then lastly here, Mr. Original Triple-Double, Oscar Robertson.
Mm-hmm.
He won that 71 title with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the one more title that Kareem got over Magic. I think he belongs based on great individual statistics and that title. I'm going to put him just over Dirk here. So there we have it, the tier list. Real quickly, I wanted to read through some of the other players as examples that I thought of on these tiers. So our tier 4, some other players, Kevin McHale, I think was a beast as well. Dennis Rodman, the greatest rebounder of all time, was just, always a role player, about like the 3rd best guy on teams. But keep in mind, he was a key part of both the Bad Boy Pistons and the second three-peat of the Chicago Bulls. James Worthy, I think, belongs in that tier 4 category. And also, I would say Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. Some other ideas have to mention first and foremost for this tier 3, these notable misses, Isaiah Thomas, who, like Rich Cohen, considers very much in the argument of greatest point guard of all time. I think that's fair. 2 titles, no MVPs, did win a most outstanding college award, but Isaiah Thomas needs to be mentioned. Steve Nash, 2-time MVP. I think he should be mentioned. He's kind of an example of a tier 3 player, great individual accomplishments. It's kind of funny to say about Steve Nash because he was an ultimate team guy as well. Modern players also that belong here. Giannis Antetokounmpo already has 1 title, 2 MVPs, and Jokic, same thing, 1 title, 2 MVPs. We'll see if Jokic can repeat this season. Tier 2, wanted to mention George Mikan, give him a shout out. He's from the 1950s. He's from even before the MVP award was handed out, and actually part of the 1940s. Won 5 titles, is the reason that we have the goaltending rule in basketball. So I think George Mikan, Justin, like you were saying, I kind of want to pay homage to the past, and I think he would be a bigger part of the conversation had we been alive back then. Also, another guy from that era, won 6 titles with Bill Russell, won an MVP award, one of the early MVP award winners, Bob Cousy. I think should also be mentioned. He was drafted in 1950, so may have won additional MVPs had the MVP award been handed out. And then we've got everyone in our top tier was on that tier board machine. So I think that wraps up our overall mapping of this. And Justin, I was thinking we each start at 10 and we just go back and forth. Pencil in our top 10 list for 2023.
All right. My top 10 at the number 10 spot, I'm going with Larry Bird. 3-time NBA champion, 2-time NBA Finals MVP, 3 times NBA Most Valuable Player. Really, I was really toying with this. I was like, okay, should I put him in there? Should I not? But after I admit, you asked me on a different day, you may not make the list. I do think with Kevin Durant, if he just wins a couple more titles, he will surpass Larry Bird. But he
Mm.
barely made it. But he is at my number 10 spot.
Yeah, Larry Bird is on my top 10. I'll be talking about him later. Don't want to spoil that just yet. I think what he did and when he did it, um, he's yeah he's I think appropriately rated, on like our tier board list. Like I wouldn't legitimately go to bat for him as he is the greatest to ever do it,
Me
but on
either.
a top 10 list, this is like our little space of wiggle room where we can kind of add our own touch to it. He's on my top 10. My number 10 is Wilt Chamberlain. Like I said earlier, mythological individual statistics, didn't have as much title success. I think, kind of oddly enough, maybe very similar narratives to Shaquille O'Neal from the 90s. Like a lot of people thought, Shaq and Kobe should have just stayed together and won like 7 or 8 titles. Who knows if that could have even been possible? Probably not. But um, kind of felt like if he was a little bit more focused on things, certain things, maybe would have won more titles. I feel a little bit the same when I read about Wilt, and I say that because you and I didn't watch him play, so I have to take that with a grain of salt. But he is on my top 10. He's number 10 for me. Justin, give me your number 9 if you would.
Yeah, number 9 is Tim Duncan, greatest
Love
power
it.
forward ever, 5-time champion, 3-time Finals MVP, 15-time All Star. Just seeing him play, and I think that's another factor on this list. Um, and then that's why there's just a little bit of like a lack of Wilt Chamberlain on my list, just because of not seeing him play. Again, I just needed a vibe of them on here, and really, like the only person that was inescapable is Bill Russell. So,
Mhm.
besides that, just getting to Tim Duncan, just a quiet big man, pretty much unappreciated, but dominant, I would say, in terms of his peers, and was the linchpin of the San Antonio Spurs for over a decade. So, glad to have him on this list.
We are thinking similarly. Duncan is also on my list. He's a little bit higher. So, again, I won't spoil it, but I love the points that you made there. I do think he is, at the moment, the greatest power forward to ever do it. Another fun fact about Duncan, I think the only NBA player to have 13 consecutive all defensive teams,
Hmm.
along with 13 consecutive All Star game appearances.
Now,
Uh,
incredible.
so very impressive guy. And again, I'm glad we're both bringing him up on the list because I think he really just doesn't get his due for how great he was. And in part because he wanted it that way. So you could blame him for that in part, I guess. But the guy was amazing. If if I were drafting, I would say like if we have no players, we each get a first pick, and I have like Duncan and Kobe, two of the players of the same era. Honestly, I would probably pick Duncan first just because of that Spurs culture that was built there. And we'll talk about Kobe more because he's on my list too. So maybe
Yeah.
that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there we go. Um, so my number 9, moving right along here, I have Steph Curry. And I put him here because I see him as the foundational piece for that Warriors dynasty. And I think you can also say he is the greatest perimeter shooter of all time in the 3-point era. He's kind of the guy who really, I wouldn't say he ushered it in, but man, he really has capitalized off of it. And you can say the 3-point era is kind of gimmicky and whatnot. And I would agree with some of that conversation, but it's undeniable when you see Steph play, it just jumps off of the screen. The way he can just come back, pop up. You can't really guard him from outside. And if he has his shot on that night, and most nights he does, it's very tough to get a win out of the Warriors. And they just recently won in 2022. And who knows, they might still have one more championship in the tank. I'm not predicting that for this year, but you never know. They're still in the conversation after all this time. So my number 9, Steph Curry. Give me your number 8.
Number 8 is Shaquille O'Neal,
Ooh, all right.
four-time NBA champion, just 3 times Finals MVP. I know this is super controversial, but just seeing him play the most dominant force I think the league's ever seen. I mean, no one was
Mm,
able to stop him, and
yeah.
he was the linchpin, not Kobe. Now you could argue, you take a look at even the Sacramento Kings team; they almost beat them with a prime Shaq and a not super prime Kobe, but still an incredible Kobe Bryant. So that's a strike against him and his weight, um, and just in terms of being an elite condition athlete in terms of his injuries. Again, you can hold that against him. However, you can't deny him as a force. And also, him. It's weird because he's 8 on my list, so I'm making a case against him. But you take a look at the Orlando Magic, and they never won a title with them, even though they were really, really close. Even facing a Hakeem Olajuwon. However, I just do feel like his prime, just those 3 titles he had with the Lakers. I don't know. I just felt wrong not including him in the 8th spot, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was incredible. I mean, hack a Shaq. That comes from
Yeah.
Shaq. I love seeing him on the list. He's not on mine. This is first one where I think we have maybe bigger. I don't know. I guess disagreement. I mean, ultimately, you know how it goes. You and I both like to kind of gush over the players. I love Shaq. Didn't crack my top 10, but um, also a guy. I mean, kind of one of the last like great bigs of all time in the traditional post sense of the game. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, you could tell me Embiid and Jokic are greats as well, um, but it's in a much different fashion.
Yeah, it is.
Um, Love that pick. Number 8, don't need to talk about him much more because we already did. It's Tim Duncan.
Mhm.
And I put him ahead of Steph on my list because he led those Spurs dynasties. He won one more title than Steph at this point. Steph is still playing, might have time to ascend past him. But yeah, we've gushed about Tim Duncan. So he's my number 8. Give me your number 7.
My number 7, we talked about him already, so I won't spend too much time. In the interest of time, is Kobe Bryant. Just a mama mentality, impact on the league, 5-time NBA champion. I think what's kind of keeping him off like the top 5, just a lot of teams, I think his selfishness kind of got in the way. Um, a lot of just kind of teammate issues, somewhat, but at the same time, influenced a culture that turned Team USA around with that 2008 Olympic team. So, a lot of accolades towards Kobe. Phenomenal player. Just his impact in the league, like you were saying, Matt, earlier, is felt to this day.
Absolutely. Kobe is also on my list. Yeah. And I think this sounds like an insult when you say it. I don't mean it as an insult, but Kobe is the greatest Michael Jordan impression that the league has ever seen. He is even more so than Jordan, the greatest difficult shot maker of all time. Um, Especially that like baseline ish area fadeaway, post up fadeaway. Jordan got that later in his career. Kobe got that as well and kind of took that from Jordan's kid and sort of perfected it. Now I have Jordan higher than Kobe on my list, spoilers, um, but I think Kobe doesn't get his due. He did a lot of good things in those first 3 titles.
Yeah.
But you're right. It was Shaq led. I would say, especially for the first 2, and then Kobe comes more into his own. There's a little bit more of an argument between the 2, but point well taken on that. And you're right. Chemistry issues, unfortunately, probably did um, wreck his chances at tying Jordan with maybe a 6th title in there. Everyone, of course, talks about that 2004 title that the Lakers probably on paper should have beaten the Pistons, and the Pistons just had way better chemistry and played way better defenses, as you all know. Going to number 7, I have Larry Legend here. I have Larry
Mhm.
Bird on my number 7. Um, and I think this is in a way paying homage to the golden age of the NBA, the revitalization of the NBA. Bird was instrumental in that. I think Magic was overall a better player than Bird. Bird was the greatest small forward for a long time. I think when we get into like KD conversation, no doubt. I mean, you could tell me today like KD versus Bird in their primes one on one. Yeah, you could make the argument. Certainly, I would agree. Like if it's just a one on one game of basketball, KD is going to beat Bird, I think. But when you look at legacy, career, culturally, potentially even, I think Larry gets the tip of the cap for me. I think there are arguments that sort of morph the weight of titles that KD had. I think KD was the most talented player on those Warriors teams, but they're kind of Steph's teams, so it's a little bit weird that even though he has those two titles, for me personally, I don't know. I can't from a legacy perspective, overlook that KD left the Thunder to join the Warriors there. That does, in my book, strike against KD there. But getting into a little bit of a digression here, so we'll keep moving. We both have Larry Bird, number 10 for you, number 7 for me. Go ahead and give me your number 6 here, Justin.
Yeah, number 6. I'll spend a little bit of time on this. Steph Curry. I think he's the greatest shooter who
Oh,
ever
wow.
lived. I think he's revolutionized shooting forever. I think in terms of the TikTok era that we're in. I mean, even I think you said it yourself, Matt, just with your son, just in terms of other kids wanting to shoot threes, and that wasn't what we were doing when we were growing up. Everybody wanted to dunk, so I think it was him that incorporated that era, and him that I think he has an everyman mentality to him. And I think it's great for the league in terms of, Steph Curry wasn't the top player out of college. He went to Davidson. His career was almost over with his ankle injuries, and really turned it around to become the greatest shooter who ever lived and be the linchpin of a franchise that, let's face it, that was pretty underrated and ignored in the league for a long time, other than a couple of teams here or there. So to me, he is a big foundation because of that, and that's why he's 6 on this list. And I think it's possible for him to win another title. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. So that's why he's 6 on here. I know that's controversial, but at his value, his shooting and value, his contribution to the league so much. And you see the paint being extended. That's Steph Curry.
Great pick. Number 6, we're going to get controversial here, and I'm going to go with LeBron James now. I know a lot of you will have him a lot higher. Yeah. I mean, a guy who made a lot of finals trips, no doubt. Again, echoing conversation, just kind of shorten this a little bit. Like longevity is there, stats are there, no doubt. But actions stemming from the decision, stemming from leaving Cleveland to go to LA, holds LeBron back a little bit for me. It's a little bit of a lack of competitive spirit that I see also like Kevin Durant being influenced by. I think LeBron doing those moves. And again, I'm for players doing what they want to do. But when we're looking at your legacy, it's going to come into play for me if you team up. And Justin, you well know, I mean, way earlier episodes of the podcast, some of you may remember. I mean, I'm a fan of LeBron. I rooted for those Heat teams in many instances.
Yeah, you're a huge LeBron fan. Yeah.
But I think when you look at overall legacy and when you look at how those things were played out, I mean, I had a conversation with someone on Twitter the other day just saying, like, imagine if Magic Johnson had joined the Boston Celtics or the other way around. Larry Bird loses to Magic and joins the Los Angeles Lakers. It's just from an NBA perspective, almost sacrilegious. Now, LeBron didn't do quite the thing that Kevin Durant did in terms of jumping ship. But in my book, that holds him back from being top 5 on my list. Now, he's still playing. He's still accumulating stats. And as always, these lists are subject to change.
I think we've changed. It's funny because I think I felt the way you did when you're rooting for LeBron.
Yeah.
Now kind of changed my mind.
Yeah.
If you take a look at, and again, this is something that was not easy for me to come to this realization. The points you make makes sense at first because I'm in a minority and I get killed on our group chat about this, but being loyal to a team. People just want to jump ship. People want to bounce and not be loyal. I mean, I am a Bulls fan for life. I will die one just because of the team I picked. And I think that is
Mhm.
unnatural. However, if you take a look at LeBron's career, you take a look at the decision. Did he handle that correctly? No. But if he handled that right, I mean, you just said it, Matt. He was the number one player on those teams.
True.
He was the number one player on the Cavaliers. And you can argue, you know, I would say with the Lakers, Anthony Davis was awesome, but LeBron wasn't crap on that team. I mean, he was the number two player on that squad.
Oh yeah.
I think what would be for me a penalty for him if, let's say, he had two titles now, and then all of a sudden, like, he went to Phoenix and he was like the fourth best player. Let's say that he won like four more championships. Like, clearly, you're the fourth. You're a lower tier option, and I think there's a little bit of ring chasing. But he's been the best player on all these teams. You can't deny his stats. You can't deny his impact on the game. So I think we vastly disagree on that, and
Yeah.
we'll kind of get to why. But that makes sense. But
Right.
I would argue also in terms of player empowerment, I think that's a positive in terms of players having autonomy in terms of putting pressure on these franchises. If you can't get it done, I'm leaving. If
Mhm.
if you're going to treat, I mean, it's come out in terms of how badly LeBron was treated in Cleveland by his owner and with those teams that they put around him. I mean, at first, his first go around. So I get what you're saying, but I disagree. I think just
Sure.
hit the impact that LeBron has had is going to be felt. It's very much like a Magic Johnson esque impact that's going to be felt for years to come. So I get what you're saying. I think your points are completely valid. I just disagree.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I'm sure most people will disagree with me because I think for the modern NBA fan and maybe even more beyond that, I think LeBron's top three for most people.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's necessarily unfair to go
Hmm.
about it that way. And when you look at statistics too, depending on how much you're valuing that, yeah, I think all these guys now at this point on our list, I think are valid. Like this may be the best to ever do it.
Yeah.
Um, let me tell you the moment where things change, though. So when LeBron goes back to Cleveland, I think this is a pivotal moment because he wins that epic title, maybe the greatest NBA finals to ever be played. Now that would get
Mhm.
argument as well, but that 2015-16 one where the Cavs win it in 7, Kyrie makes the shot, all that. If
Mhm.
LeBron stays in Cleveland from that point on, I think regardless of how many more titles he wins or doesn't win, there's a much different feel. And I think he's almost kind of like absolved from the move to Miami, from Cavs fans. But shortly after that, just doing his thing and moving to LA comes across as being like a mercenary and just trying to now like manufacture these titles. I mean, that's kind of what it felt like going back to Cleveland, but at least he had the like I'm coming home narrative. But he was only home for a little while again, till
That's
he
true.
went back. But again, I mean, we could talk about this all day,
We
but
can.
that's just to give kind of framework about where my perception shifted. That would be one of the key moments is when when LeBron goes to the Lakers. And I know a lot of you are going to be going to be ripping on me for putting him at number 6. Let's get through our top 5 here,
Sure.
Justin. Why don't you give me your number 5?
Yeah, 5 real quick. It might be a disservice, but in the interest of time, Bill Russell, most titles
Mm,
won, most finals appearances, one of the greatest players ever, held in high revere of any NBA legend you talk to. So he's number 5.
yeah. Yeah, we had talked about him earlier in the episode. He is on my list as well. So we definitely agreement on him being in the top 10 for sure. My number 5 is Kobe Bean Bryant, who we also have touched on a bit here. So I don't think we need to go into much greater detail since we had some Kobe talk earlier. Let's move right into number 4, Justin.
Yeah, number 4, we talked about him also, Magic Johnson. Cultural impact, I think, was I mean, Jordan gets a lot of credit in terms of his business acumen, but really Magic Johnson is the businessman. You take a look at what he's done
Mm,
after his career in terms of Magic Johnson theaters, owning your own IP to develop great business decisions. I mean, if we take a look, I mean, he's the part owner of the current sports champions around sports nowadays. And not to mention his playing career. So cultural impact is pretty legendary as well. 5-time NBA champion, 3-time NBA MVP. Just
mhm.
a legend. I think we've talked about him a bunch. So he's number 4.
Yeah, we have exact agreement on this. He's my number 4 as well. And yeah, you bring up great points. I wasn't even really considering his business acumen, which is a great point to bring up. So yeah, agreement on Magic being number 4. Um, Go ahead, give me your number 3.
Yeah, 3 is Kareem
Mm,
Abdul-Jabbar. Again, Lou Alcindor. I mean, we touched about him in college, and then just his legendary NBA career, and also just culturally. I mean, just he was in a movie of Bruce Lee. I mean,
yeah,
he
yeah.
was in Airplane. I mean, this guy was popular. And it's such a weird his compared to other legends. It's kind of like you I don't know. He's kind of like I don't know. You ever had like a family friend who's like, why? You, he has such a weird. I've had a family friend who's just kind of like, why do my parents know this guy? But like, you have like a relationship with my folks, but like
I
you don't
see what you're
just
saying.
something weird when you're younger. It's just like
Yeah,
something's off. And I think with Kareem, like something's off with him, like in
yeah,
terms of his valuement in the league. Like I think last year is probably the best the league has ever done in terms of of honoring his legacy with
yeah,
LeBron passing. I mean, is probably the best thing that ever happened to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar post his career, with LeBron breaking his scoring record. So prior to that, I just felt there's just a weird presence around him. And it's not necessarily him, but it's about others talking about him, and I don't understand why. It's just a weird thing with him. But I'm glad he gets the credit on our list of being ranked so high. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think honestly, if if Kareem had played in with the marketing like MJ did,
sure,
I don't know if we're even having the argument about who's the GOAT. Like Kareem had so many individual accolades and impact on the court. Like if he had just played the game that Magic and Jordan both played and wasn't a little bit more aloof and distant like that. And granted, that's his choice. And I can't imagine what it would be like to have the media pressure that these guys, these all timers have. But I think ultimately that may be why he's not considered by a lot of people to be the best to do it. I think he is almost overridden in conversations now, and I think a lot of it is just because people assume he didn't play legit competition, or people don't realize that he also did this for like 20 seasons. So if you're talking about like longevity argument, like LeBron, like Kareem's right there too. Yeah, I mean, he almost was one on my list. I was really, I'm still racking my brain about it, but he's not on my list yet. Number 3 for me is Bill Russell, who you mentioned earlier. We discussed him earlier in his early legacy in the league: 11-time champion, 5-time MVP, ultimate teammate, ultimate defender, yada yada. Also took on Wilt head to
right.
head in a finals, which to uh, to cap off that 69 finals win, which I think is like a great way for him to go out. So just legendary career. Let's move on to our number 2s here.
Number 2, I mean, we can get in this debate all night, so maybe another episode where we just talk about LeBron's legacy.
Yeah, yeah,
Save that for another time. But LeBron,
yeah,
most NBA, all NBA selections, most points scored all time. Uh, just an icon in terms of maintaining the pressure of being a high school player that had that much attention,
yeah,
create the template of what we know really for NIL, if you think about it, in terms of the pressure that players have in all sports. LeBron had that. And I just think for him to not have really a speck of controversy and to surpass the hype and become, I mean, even if you hate LeBron, I mean, he's top 5 all time at worst. So I mean, it's just one of those things where it's just incredible just to see his legacy. So he's number 2.
Yeah, and still playing games.
Yeah,
Oldest player in the NBA, and he'll be presumably one of the top scorers in the league this season if things are similar to how
yeah,
they were last season. So incredible career. No argument from me there in terms of him being outstanding. I think he is, of all these players in the top 10, he may be the mold of the basketball player that you want.
yeah.
Like I've said this before, I'll say it again quickly. If you're building your 2K team or your 2K player on NBA 2K, like LeBron is the guy that you want to be. He's taller than most players. He's faster than most players. He shoots better than most players. He can get to the rim like nobody's business. He can defend. He can do whatever you want to do. He's the Swiss Army knife, can do it all, and has done it all at the highest level. So definitely, even though people are going to think I hate LeBron based on where I put him, great deal of respect for what LeBron has done, certainly on the court. My number 2, we just touched on him quite a bit, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Um, yeah, he's incredible. I don't think we need to say anything else since we just spoke about him. So let's reveal our number 1s and then get out of here.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Michael Jordan is number 1. Um,
You
you
got the
know what?
Chicago hoodie on.
Yeah, right. What can you say, right? Just 2-time, three-peat, cultural impact. The guy's logos on everything. Just revolutionized sneakers, revolutionized just competitive spirit. He's the soul of Kobe Bryant is Michael Jordan. He is the reason why the league is popular as it is now. I mean, what else is there to say? Revolutionized Olympic. I mean, we can just go on and on and on. I think kind of that the knock against him would be his college career. I think other players on this list have had better college careers.
The
If we're talking about
retirement.
the greatest, yeah, yeah, you're right. Just him coming back from retirement. I think that certainly is
Well,
up
2
for debate.
retirements. Yeah.
Yep, true. But to me, just I don't think there's any other player or athlete in any other sport that is like Michael. And that goes for Tom Brady. If you want to, I mean, we can think of any other athlete. Jordan is it. I think Tiger Woods was maybe the closest, maybe.
Mhm.
But Jordan is he's just an unbelievable. He is in terms of athletics, I can't really think of someone that is held in such I'm going to use a religious term, like a God term. Like he's just like, and especially when, we're going to be up in, our 80s and 90s and we're going to be talking to younger people. I mean, he's going to be like this myth. People are going to be like, is he like Thor or like, Paul Bunyan? Like, it's just like one of those things where I just think seeing him in person, I don't know if you felt the same way. Any other player has not matched the feelings of just seeing Jordan. It was mythical. There's no other way to describe it. So he is number 1 on my list.
He's number 1 on my list as well. We do have agreement here. I do think, again, I want to give credit to like both Kareem and Russell, who
Yeah,
really,
of course.
that's like my top 3 in the argument. And then, a lot of people will throw LeBron James in the mix, which he's been very impressive too. I can see that side as well. MJ, when you factor in that cultural impact, I mean, every kid wanting to be like Mike, I don't think we see that with LeBron. Like when you see the pull that Steph has had away from LeBron,
It's
I
different.
think kids
LeBron's
look at
different.
LeBron and say, I can't be LeBron, because that guy is so physically impressive. Whereas there's a little bit more of a relatability with Jordan. If you look at the dream team, if you
Sure.
look at like the growth of the sport, that basically MJ was able to take the torch from Magic and Bird and push into the late stages of the golden age of the NBA. And then there is a huge vacuum when he leaves the NBA. Now, I don't think I don't blame Jordan for people being like Jordan copycat acts. it just turns out that that's a very high degree of difficulty. Like, I think an argument for Jordan against Kareem is that it's tougher to do things the way Jordan did, being 6'6", compared to having the invincible skyhook shot, for one thing, that nobody can block. Jordan had a different set of problems he had to solve, being a shooting guard instead of the center. That plays into it. It's just a little bit more of a visual spectacle to watch. It's athletically impressive when you see him win the dunk contest jumping off the free throw line to do that. So, yeah, I mean, again, we could be here all day
Yeah.
talking about Jordan. He
No,
makes it to
totally
our
true.
number one. I think his influence is still felt around the league in spite of basically all the players except for LeBron not having really watched him all that much growing
Yeah.
up. I mean, very few. Some of them maybe caught the tail end of his last three-peat.
Yeah.
You and I had the good fortune to at least remember his second three-peat and part of the first three-peat, I think.
Yeah.
He's incredible. I
Yeah.
mean, uh, you know, there are documentaries about him, and maybe The Last Dance exaggerates things a little bit in his favor since it's a little bit crafted by him
It's
and his
Jordan
team.
biased. Yeah.
Right. But a lot of that is valid.
Sure.
And a lot of that is really how things were in the 90s. And that's because of
Yeah.
how great of a player he
Yeah.
was.
Well, and also you don't. I'm trying to think. Maybe Tom Brady, maybe, but
Yeah.
even but what separates like Jordan from Brady, even though like Brady has more titles, is even when Jordan was, and I always thought this was weird, like when Jordan was playing, other players would like revere him. And whenever you're talking about like international players that would ask for his
Mm.
autograph during his dream team run, we're talking about like current like players playing against him. Like you just had this reverence. You don't see that in sports when you know you're playing against your contemporary, unless it's retirement or something happens to them. But it has had this reverence for him that I never seen for another athlete in terms of them both playing at the same time. So it's just really incredible.
He earned that respect, yeah, and
Yeah,
he definitely generated a lot of fear for his
no, it's true.
opponents
Yeah,
that had the misfortune of playing against him. A lot
no,
of the
agreed.
greats on that tier list that we reviewed would be in higher positions. Karl Malone and Charles Barkley, namely
Yeah,
John Stockton as well. Hakeem Olajuwon potentially would be in greater positions on this tier list had it not been for Michael Jordan standing in the way and claiming the throne. Justin, we went way over time,
we
but
did.
it was a very fun chat.
Russ.
And I hope you, the listeners, enjoyed it as well. Give us your top 10. Give us, what you agree with, what you disagree with. Tell me why I'm so wrong about where I put LeBron. It's all good. It's all love. Let's have a fun conversation about it. Anything else you would like the good listeners to know?
Only thing is, check out our archives for just our season previews, great interviews in there, and then cheers to another season. I think this is our second full season, so not COVID related. Is that correct? Not like
Yes.
not like a regular start in
Right,
October,
right,
correct?
right. Yep.
Okay, cool. So just don't want to take that for granted. Just with our podcast being, we had the finals and it's such a weird time. So just great again, just to have a normal start to the season again.
Absolutely. Yep. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We enjoyed bringing it to you. We will be in touch again very soon. We're going to be giving our NBA regular season awards predictions soon here and talking about anything and everything around the league with that. So for Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Thanks as always for listening and or watching. And we will check in with you again very soon. Peace out.
See ya.